Hello, you're welcome to today's lesson. Today we want to look at solving quadratic equation using the Po-Shen law approach. Remember that quadratic equations are equations in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. Now in our attempt to solve quadratic equation, there are several approaches that we can use. We have the factorization approach, we have the completing square, and then we have the general formula. Here we have another one deduced by the American professor of mathematics, Po-Shen law, and he says that to be able to solve an equation, which is a quadratic equation, we have to take or make use of this setup, that is p squared minus u squared equal to c. And in finding p, we find the negative of b out of 2. Now let's take an example of an equation to be able to appreciate this fact. So an example of a quadratic equation we can make use of is x squared minus 2x minus 3 equal 0. Now the next thing we do is to find p. According to the definition of p, which is the negative of the value of b out of 2, you realize that to get b, we will have to get p rather, we will have to substitute b into this setup, the setup that we have here. So we go back to this equation, x squared minus 2x minus 3 equals 0, and compare it with the infinitive form of the quadratic equation, which is this way. So you realize that b is the coefficient of x. So coming down here, the coefficient of x here is negative 2. That implies that to get p, we have to input negative 2 for b. Now, working out for this or evaluating this, you realize that p will definitely be equal to 1. At this point, the next thing we can do is to put in the value of p into this setup as a Po-Shen law setup, right? So finding or putting in the value for p into this setup, let's see what happens. It means wherever p is found, we put 1 there. Now if you agree with me, the square of 1 will definitely be 1. So we can input 1 minus u squared equals c. Then again, comparing the equation we're given to the infinity setup of a quadratic equation, you realize that the value of c is negative 3. So we can input negative 3 wherever that we find c. The next thing we do is to make u the subject. Actually, we make u the subject, not u squared. But first of all, we evaluate to get the value of u squared, and then we continue to evaluate the value of u. You remember that, or you can clearly agree with me that at this point we will have to find the square root of 4. Now the square root of 4 in this case will simply lead us to getting the value of u. Now the value of u will then be given as plus or minus u. Good. So plus or minus 2. So u is equal to plus or minus 2. Good. Now the next thing we do is to make use of this setup, which helps us to get the 2-in-1 factors for the quadratic equation. So the setup is written as x is equal to plus or minus p plus or minus u. So p plus or minus u. Good. Right. So one of the values or one of the factors of this quadratic equation will therefore be obtained. That is x1 be obtained by adding 1 to either the negative root or the positive root of 2. Right. So in adding the negative root of 2, x1 will arrive at -1. Now in finding the second value of, or the second factor, which is x2, we realize that we have to add 1 to the positive root of u, which was plus 2, positive 2. That means that the second factor will therefore be equal to 3. So basically, that is what Po-Shen law says. Now, let's turn our attention to an equation which is not factorable and see how you can go about it using the Po-Shen law. Now, Po-Shen law, remember, in you getting an equation which is not factorable, you realize that such equations cannot be solved using the factoring approach, but rather the completing square approach. Good. Now, example of such equation is 2x squared minus 3x minus 1 equals 0. Now, remember, the first way or the first step to go about it in solving this question or such questions using the Po-Shen law is to make the coefficient of x squared become 1. That is to say, divide each of the numbers in the equation by 2. Doing that will eliminate or make the coefficient of x squared become 1. That is to say that the value of b here will become -3 out of 2. Now remember, using the Po-Shen law, we said we need to put it in the setup p squared minus u squared equals c. Now the value of b here now is 3 out of 2. Now 3 out of 2 divided by 2 will give us a positive of 3 out of 4 because the negative will work out themselves. Now getting that value, we then come and put 3 out of 4 into this equation or this setup, where we have 3 out of 4 squared equals 3 out of squared minus u squared equal -1 out of 2, because the value of c was -1 out of 2. The next thing we do is to group like terms. So 3 squared was 9, 4 squared is 16 actually. So grouping like terms, we have 9 on 16 plus 1 on 2 equal to u squared. So adding these fractions that we have here is 17 on 16 equal u squared. So we find the root of u. Finding the root of u will give us plus or minus root of 17 on 16, right? The next thing we do is to input it into our setup for finding the two different factors, which is x is equal to p plus or minus u. So the first factor could be obtained by adding 3 on 4, which is the value of p, to the positive root of u, which is plus root of 17 on 16. Again, the second factor of x can be obtained by finding the difference between the value of p, which is 3 out of 4, and then that of the negative root of 17 out of 16. So that is what Po-Shen law says in finding the roots of quadratic equations. All comments are highly welcomed. Thank you for watching.